Pleasure to be here this evening to once again speak to all the wonderful people who come to the Eucharistic Convention. I'd like to just start with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of thy faithful, and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Today we stand at a critical point in history, and I thought it was quite interesting what Bishop Pat said during his homily, that New Zealand is one of 3 countries where religion is declining, or belief in God. It was also interesting to note that the Netherlands as a country was one of the other countries. They're a country that kill their elderly, they're sick, they're disabled, and now even their children, if they so desire it. We too are on the threshold of allowing our physicians to kill our people. And it is because we have forgotten the value of human life, life made in the image and the likeness of God, our Creator. We have forgotten because we have decided that we can be the architects of our own lives, that we can play God. We have forgotten because in our marriages and in our family lives, we have left God out of the bedroom, and we have taken that life-giving act of marriage and cut God right out of it, cut the potential for life right out of it. And then flowing on from that, we have decided that we will abort our children. And it happens in our church. This is not something that happens outside in society. It happens in our church. Many of you will know people who contracept, who create their babies through IVF, and therefore countless human lives are lost, who maybe have had an adverse diagnosis in pregnancy and have been counselled that the best thing to do for that child is to end its life, instead of putting trust into God and give that child life for the days that God ordains. That was not what I had prepared, so forgive me. But it is a critical time in our history. And I think that one day people will look back at this time in history and wonder and see it as a defining moment for the world and for the church. See, today we stand right in between 2 synods of the family, and as you know, the last synod of the family created a little bit of a stir, bit of controversy. And later on this year, just prior to the second synod on the family, there is the World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia, which, God willing, I will be able to attend and to represent our diocese. So family is very much on the agenda, and it's both the natural family and I also think the family of God as well. And I think, what Bishop Pat was talking about is what I was planning on talking about, is that we are losing our faith in this country But we must not be afraid, because with all these terrible things that are happening, the attacks against the family that St. John Paul II talked about constantly, and even Pope Francis has spoken about it recently, that even with that we have the hope of Christ. Christ is the answer, and we must not be afraid to speak out about our faith in Jesus Christ. And we have to live a life of courage. And we have to do it for the sake of our children, for the sake of our grandchildren, and for future generations to come. Today I really want to encourage you to be courageous, even when it is incredibly frightening, when it's inconvenient, when it's the last thing you feel like doing. I've struggled all week. Here I am talking about being courageous. All I want to do is run and hide. It is not natural for me to come and stand in front of people. I would much rather hide behind my keyboard. But there is too much at stake. We're talking about eternity. If we are afraid to speak the truth in love, what becomes of the souls that do not hear that truth? It doesn't bear thinking about. Our mission in this life is to show the world the light of Christ. You know, after communion we sang, "Here I am, Lord, is it I, Lord? I have heard you calling in the night. I will go if you lead me." Have you heard God calling in the night? Have you taken up that challenge to do what God is calling you to do, to really embrace the cross, to really bring him to this world, which is so full of darkness? I'm so out of this now. Our children need strong role models. I know that when I was growing up, and many of you I have known for most of my life, I looked to the families that were following Christ's law, the church's law. I looked to the priests, to the nuns that lived their vocation faithfully. And thankfully, my parents felt it very necessary to make sure that we were instructed in the faith. I've always had great role models, and I look around and there are some wonderful role models now in the church, but not all of our children get to see them. And that has become more and more clearer as my two eldest girls now go to college, and I realise the stories they're coming home with, just how privileged they are to have such wonderful people who are faith-filled, who show the light of Christ. So many of our young people today have nothing. There are children, young people that want to go to Mass. Their parents do not take them. How do we reach out to them and bring them in? So it's the example of generous married couples that have made an impact on my life. And generous doesn't mean that they've had large families. Generous means that They have accepted God's will, and they have found ways to serve life in the way that they have been called to do so. And here I really wanted to talk about St. Gianna Beretta Molla. I don't know if many people know of her. She was a wife and a doctor and a mother. And very early on in her 4th pregnancy, she was diagnosed with fibroids on her womb, and these needed to be removed. She was given 3 options. 1, have an abortion. 2, have a hysterectomy, which would kill the child just because it would. And obviously there's no place for the child to grow. And then she would be sterile for the rest of her life. And the 3rd option, and that 2nd option would have been perfectly licit. It would have been okay for her to choose that particular option. The 3rd option was that she just had the fibroids removed and then have the potential of more complications throughout the pregnancy. St. Gianna wanted to do everything she could to give life to her child. She chose the 3rd option, risking her own life, but ensuring that her child, her baby, had a chance at life. So 7 months later, after the operation, and after many months of suffering, St. Gianna gave birth to her 4th child by caesarean section, and a week later she succumbed to death through, she had a terrible infection. St. Gianna said, "We must be living witnesses of the beauty and the grandeur of Christianity, to make truth visible in one's own person, to render truth pleasing, offering oneself as a significant and, if possible, heroic example." St. Gianna is very, very close to my heart. She wasn't always, but 3.5 years ago, she was my intercessory before the throne of God as I lay on my deathbed. You see, I was pregnant with my 7th child, and I had had 6 previous caesarean sections, and in this particular pregnancy I was diagnosed with placenta previa, which is where the placenta is very low lying, and in my case it was the worst kind of placenta previa you could get. And how we got there was we were open to life, my husband and I. And after our 3rd child, we were told not to have any more children. And we didn't for quite some time, about 2.5 years. For us, that was quite some time. And so we had our 4th child eventually. And then that was fine. And then we had our 5th child. And that particular pregnancy was terrible. And the pressure on me to be sterilised was unbelievable. I could not believe that our medical profession would treat patients in the way that I was treated. Yes, I was very sick. But you see, when you say no, I cannot be sterilised because of my faith, because this is my religious belief, they're supposed to accept that. But every single time I went into the hospital, and even after my daughter's birth, I was pressured to be sterilised again and again and again and again. But we got over that and we decided that we were not going to have any more children, and we very carefully used natural fertility regulation to ensure, not realising that our situation actually was quite grave. But God had other plans, and He sent us our sixth child, and he really was a surprise. And that was the best pregnancy I had ever had, thanks to St. John Paul II. My seventh pregnancy, they really pressured me again. Because of the placenta previa, they said, look, you know, you could actually die. You really do need to be sterilised. You cannot have any more children. We were counselled by good Catholic people that a sterilisation in my case would be okay. But my husband and I, we thought, no, this is not right. We knew this is not right. And we went back over and over and over again over the documents from the church. There is a specific document answering questions about when it is okay to be sterilised or to have a hysterectomy. It is never, ever okay to be directly sterilised, whether you be a man or a woman. A hysterectomy, in order to save someone's life, is licit. A hysterectomy, because of medical problems, is fine. A hysterectomy, because you just don't want any more children? No. We looked at this over and over. We prayed and we prayed and we prayed, and God knows how many tears I cried. But in the end, we knew we had to trust in God. It was the most frightening thing I have ever done, but at the same time, the most peaceful thing I have ever done. And I knew that that day when I went in to the theatre, that God was with me. But little did I know that St. Gianna Beretta Mola was with me. And as I almost bled to death on the operating table, she came to me 3 times. And I also heard St. John Paul II say to me, "Be not afraid." And I knew all was going to be well. Whether I died or whether I lived, it was going to be okay, because it was God's will, and I was okay with that. Now I know that as I look around me in this room tonight, there are many of you who've got so much wisdom and life experience, and I know that you probably have those life-defining moments as well, where you have said to God, yes, I will do everything that you want me to do. I trust you with my whole heart, my whole soul, my whole mind. And I will never, ever give up on you, Lord. And I want to thank each one of you for the great inspiration that you are to those people that look up to you, because you don't know who is watching you. You don't know who sees your faithfulness. And this is all completely different to what I wrote. So I want to say to you, please don't be afraid to be courageous. We have to be visible in the world. We have to go out into the streets. We have to say how much we love Christ, and people have to see that in the way that we live our lives. You know, one of the things that I'm hearing a lot lately is that we cannot speak about our faith when it comes to life and family issues, that we must remain silent and only deal with things from a secular point of view out in society. But you know, Back in the day when Nara was trying to have abortion legalised in America, they knew they had to silence the churches, and they succeeded to a large degree. They even got churches to side with them and say that abortion in some circumstances would be okay. Today I see the same thing happening here. Just a few weeks ago, euthanasia advocates brought a man from the Netherlands to come and speak and do a tour around our country. And do you know what? He spoke in Christian churches. I also see that it is happening in the Kiribati. Family planning, New Zealand family planning are up there. They've been up there for 3 years, trying to get the people to leave the Catholic faith. It is mainly a Catholic country, although not so much anymore after 3 years of family planning being there. They have been trying to tell these people to abandon their faith and to contracept, and now they have extended their time for another 5 years. And this time their goal is to bring abortion into that land. And do you know what? They got the Christian churches to side with them. Thankfully, the Catholic Church is not. Thankfully, the Catholic Church is standing up for what is true and right. So, we cannot be silent. These things rip our families apart, right at the very, very core of our being. Because human life is sacred. It is made in the image and likeness of God. And when we destroy human life, it is an attack against God himself. And if we cannot speak up in the public square about what is true and right and good, and we know who is the truth, Christ is the truth, then we will not win this war. Mother Teresa wisely said, God does not require that we be successful, only that we be faithful. And I believe that God used our faithfulness, our dedication to him, in the way that he needs it to be used. So we may not be successful out there in society, in the way that society expects us to be successful, but in God's eyes, we have been faithful, and that's what matters. A few weeks ago, it was our final hour, or final hours outside the Auckland Medical Aid Centre, which is an abortion facility. It's actually New Zealand's oldest abortion facility. And we'd been having a 40 Days for Life vigil. I know some of you here tonight were wonderful prayer volunteers. I want to thank you for that. The vigil is 40 days long. It is prayerful, it is peaceful. It is a public witness to the atrocity that happens within the walls of that abortion clinic. It was about 2 hours out from our finish, and this young man yelled out from across the road. I have no idea what he said, but he yelled, and people around were looking at him. And he started running across Dominion Road, and of course it was busy, so he had to stop in the middle. And finally he got to the other side, and he stood there right in front of us. And there was about 4 of us there, and he stood there ready for a fight. He was ready to go. He was a young man, about in his early 20s, maybe late teens. So I pulled him aside and I said, tell me what's on your mind. And he had his rant, and he was really concerned about our sign. and how women who might have had an abortion might feel because of our sign. And I looked at him and I said, oh, it just says pregnant and worried. We care. You know, we care. He went, oh. And then he came up with the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing. And on it went. Until finally, I felt prompted to say to him, what do you think about child abuse? And he looked at me, and he had tears in his eyes. And he said, my brother is in foster care because of that. I then did something that I've never done before outside an abortion facility, and I started talking to him. Well, first of all, I talked to him about the humanity of the unborn child, and I told him about how a baby is heart's beating at 21 days, and I showed him these beautiful pictures which you won't be able to see, but I want to show you the pamphlet anyway, because you can pick one up from our Family Life International table, and it tells you what you need to know about abortion. And I showed him these beautiful little pictures, and he could see the little hands, the fingers on the unborn child. He could see the humanity. He could see that it was a child. And then I told him about, and this is the thing that I've never done before, I told him about how I had seen pictures of hands ripped off the body of a tiny wee little soul, floating in blood. It is an atrocity, and he understood that. As someone who understood what child abuse does, he could see the great injustice that abortion is. And so this young man, he kept going on a little bit, and he said, oh, you know, there were some girls here the other day, and they were protesting you guys being here, and they had a sign, and it said, my body, my choice. And I just looked at him, and I said, you've seen the pictures. You've seen the humanity of this child. It's not her body, is it? And he looked at me. He shook his head, and he said, no. Then he said to me, my mother has had an abortion. And there it was. His anger came because he had lost a sibling, a brother or a sister. You see, abortion rips apart families. It was a troubled family to begin with, but this was what was really tearing him apart at that time. So I was able to give him information about abortion. I was able to give him cards so that his mother could ring, because she felt guilt, he said to me, for what she had done. And so I said, you know, we care. We understand that your mum, she didn't know what else to do at that time. She was following the advice of the doctors that had told her she must do this. But we care and we can help, and there is forgiveness. And so then he asked me for a hug, and this was the thing that got me. He asked me for a hug, so I hugged him. And he said to me, my grandmother, she was just like you guys. She thought just like you do. See, God had used our presence there that day to touch this man's heart, to remind him of the faith of his grandmother. If we had not been there for the last 40 days, because he had seen us for 40 days, and he chose that last final day to come to us. If we had not been there, this young man may not have had those seeds of hope sown in his heart. Then the funny thing, and I'll just wind this up, after that some girls came driving past, and they were yelling out profanities as people will want to do when they see us standing there. And he looked at me and he shook his head and he said, "Oh, they don't know what they're talking about, do they?" And then he said, "How do you put up with all the abuse?" And I felt like saying, "Hello, where were you just like 5 minutes ago?" But the answer I said to him was, we know that people are hurting, and so we pray, and we're there in love, and we will reach out to them in love, just like I have to you today. And that young man walked away completely different from the first yell at us 5 minutes earlier to that 5 minutes later he had a lightness in his step, he had a smile on his face, and the world was great. God can change hearts just like that. That is one of the most profound things that I have ever experienced. It reminds me of the early days of the church, and the apostles would preach and thousands would convert. If we would just get out there and not be afraid, thousands can convert, but one soul at a time. So I'm going to finish there. Just with one last thing, that all the saints in history were very ordinary people. Saint Gianna Molla was a very ordinary person, a mother, a doctor. But by the grace of God, ordinary people can do extraordinary things. This weekend you are going to have time to replenish, to pray, to spend time with God. You're going to hear some incredible speakers, and at times they're going to challenge you. But I pray that by the end of this weekend you will feel renewed enough to get out there, to not be afraid, to be who you were created to be a sign of hope and joy in this world, and to bring many souls to heaven for the greater glory of God. Thank you.